It was supposed to be just another quirky addition to their new apartment. Nestled between cracked vinyl records and dusty vintage lamps at the back of a thrift store in Corvallis, Oregon, the couch didn't exactly scream treasure. In fact, its mustard yellow upholstery, faded and stiff, looked like it had survived a few decades too many. But something about it caught Eleanor's eye. "Look at those legs," she said, gesturing to the mid-century walnut frame. "Miles, this is solid craftsmanship." He crouched beside her, running his fingers along the woodwork. 60s, maybe late 50s, definitely handmade. The springs feel firm too. This thing's a beast. It was a cold, rainy Saturday, the kind that makes people linger longer in warm, dusty places. Eleanor Harper, a 32-year-old high school history teacher, had a habit of romanticizing the past. Her partner, Miles Bennett, 35, restored vintage furniture in their garage when he wasn't working construction jobs. They both had a soft spot for forgotten things and the stories they might carry. They bought the couch for $75, strapped it awkwardly to the roof of Miles' pickup, and drove it home, laughing every time a gust of wind made the tarp flap like a dying sail. They didn't know then that the couch would be more than a nostalgic statement piece. It would become the center of a mystery that neither of them could have imagined. Back at their apartment, the couch barely made it through the door. It was heavier than expected, and the frame creaked with a strange resistance when they tilted it sideways. Miles muttered something about replacing the webbing and maybe redoing the stuffing. Elena, sipping hot cider, flipped through a magazine and watched him work. "That couch has secrets," she joked, half serious. He chuckled. "If I find a mouse skeleton or old chewing gum, I'm blaming you." She leaned back. "You know, people used to hide money in furniture during the Depression, or love letters, or even valuables." Miles paused, eyebrows raised. "You think someone stashed a fortune in this thing?" "I think someone lived with it for a long time, that's all. It saw things." There was something about the way she said it that gave him pause. He turned back to the couch and tapped its armrest. Solid, no hollow echo. Still, he felt something in the springs that didn't quite sit right. A stiffness beyond normal compression. A tension almost. That night the couch sat in their living room like an ancient animal, heavy and quiet. Miles lay awake thinking about the warped underside he'd noticed while moving it in. The fabric had been re-sewn in places, the seams too precise, too careful for factory work. By morning, he had made up his mind. "I'm going to take it apart," he told Elena over pancakes. "Just enough to redo the support." She looked amused. "You're hoping for treasure, admit it. I'm hoping for comfort. But if I find buried gold, I won't complain. Before we dive into this bizarre and emotional journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories like this one, especially when the ordinary turns out to be anything but." With the first cut into the fabric, Miles felt it, the subtle give of something more than foam, something resistant, concealed. He glanced at Elena. "There's something in here," he whispered. She walked over, curiosity igniting behind her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, something's been sewn in. Deliberately." They exchanged a look. The room felt smaller now, the rain tapping harder against the windows. The couch, silent and imposing, suddenly demanded attention in a way that no piece of furniture ever should. And as Miles reached deeper, his fingers brushed something unexpected, thick, uneven, almost leathery. "Elena," he said, voice low, "you might want to come see this." Elena crouched beside Miles, watching as he carefully peeled back the upholstery. The fabric, though fragile from age, had been reinforced in odd places, small sections of newer stitching that didn't match the rest of the couch. Miles frowned, running his fingers along one seam. "This isn't factory work," he muttered. "Someone added this later. Maybe a DIY repair." Elena tilted her head. Or they were hiding something. The suggestion lingered in the air, heavier now. Miles cut the seam gently, pulling it open just enough to see inside. Beneath the surface, nestled among the aging foam and burlap, was a soft rectangular bulge wrapped in fabric. It wasn't foam, and it wasn't structural. He reached in and pulled the object free. It was a hand-stitched panel, oddly lumpy, and wrapped in a faded floral kitchen towel from what looked like the 1950s. Dust clung to the edges. Elena took it from him with a gentle reverence, as if she were handling a relic from a museum. "Why hide this inside a couch?" she whispered. Miles didn't answer. He was already poking around the cavity, feeling for anything else. A minute later, he found two more similar bundles. All three were about the size of a paperback book, light but solid, and clearly placed with care. They set them on the dining table, surrounded by tools and scraps of fabric. Elena began unwrapping the first one slowly, revealing what looked like a bundle of papers, yellowed and brittle at the edges. She unfolded one. "Letters," she murmured. "They're love letters." Miles leaned in, peering at the neat, looping cursive. The ink had faded slightly, but was still legible. March 9th, 1962. My dearest Margaret, the nights are colder without you. I walk the orchard at dusk and hear your voice in the rustling leaves. I swear, if your father hadn't forbidden me from the house, I'd still be at your window each night. Forever yours, T.G. Eleanor let out a soft breath. This is personal. Miles opened the second bundle. More letters, similarly aged and addressed to Margaret Fields, a name neither of them recognized. The third bundle, however, was different. Tucked inside the towel was a worn envelope, sealed with red wax. On the front, written in delicate cursive, "To be opened only in love." Elena hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the wax. "Should we open it?" she asked. Miles gave her a long look. "I mean, we already tore the couch apart." That made her laugh softly, but there was weight behind her smile. Something about the letters felt sacred, like they were meant to remain unread, or perhaps desperately needed to be. "I want to wait," she decided. "Let's go through the others first, carefully." Over the next hour, they sorted through nearly a dozen letters. Each one painted a picture of a forbidden romance in the early 1960s. The writer, Thomas Greeley, was deeply in love with Margaret Fields. His words were poetic, aching, filled with longing. He mentioned a strict father, a broken engagement, and promises to run away together. Elena grew quieter with each letter. The emotion behind the words was raw, vulnerable. She'd read plenty of historical documents as a teacher, but this was different. This was a living story pulsing from the past. Miles, meanwhile, focused on the couch itself. He flipped it on its back and examined the frame. "You know, someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this. It's not just nostalgia. They wanted these things to be found, or never to be." He tapped a support beam. It sounded solid, but his instincts told him there was more. Eleanor folded one letter and looked at him. "Do you think Margaret ever got away? Or was this her only escape?" "I don't know," he replied. "But I think we're about to find out." And just like that, the thrill of restoration had transformed into something deeper. They weren't just fixing a couch. They were unraveling a story buried in stitches. Later that evening, after dinner had gone cold and the letters lay spread across their table like fragile maps of someone else's heartbreak, Miles returned to the couch with renewed curiosity. Something about the way the stuffing resisted his earlier cuts had stayed with him. He turned the frame over once more, running his hands across the inner lining with deliberate care. There, just beneath the left armrest, was a section that felt subtly uneven. The fabric had been stretched over something dense, something embedded between the wooden slats. He retrieved his knife and sliced gently, revealing a thin pocket tucked inside the lining. His fingers closed around something. He pulled it out slowly. It was a small leather pouch worn smooth with age, the color of dried leaves. A faint scent of cedar and something faintly metallic lingered. The drawstring had long since frayed, but it was still knotted tightly. Miles called Elena over, his voice hushed. "I found something else." She looked up from the letter she was rereading and joined him, kneeling beside the opened frame. He handed her the pouch. "It feels heavy," she said, weighing it in her palm. "Maybe coins." Miles watched as she untied the knot and eased the pouch open. Out spilled a collection of faded papers, folded with precision. Beneath them was a thin chain, gold, delicate, and tangled around a tiny locket. Eleanor gasped softly. Inside the locket was a miniature photograph, cracked along the edges. It showed a young woman with dark hair pinned back in waves, her expression demure yet steady. On the other side, etched in cursive, "MF." Eleanor touched the engraving, her brow furrowed. "Margaret Fields." There was more. A folded slip of paper, separate from the rest, bore a name and address written in pencil. Neither of them recognized it. The address was in eastern Oregon, hours away. Miles looked up at her. "Think it's a clue?" "I don't know. But someone hid this for a reason." The papers in the pouch were different from the others. While the first set of letters had been poetic and romantic, these felt almost urgent. Shorter sentences, torn edges, as if they were written in haste. Eleanor read one aloud. August 2nd, 1964. Tom, he knows, he found the ring. I tried to deny everything, but he won't listen. He says I'm bringing shame to the family. I don't know what to do. I can't stay. I'm scared. I'll leave tonight. I'll be at the orchard by dusk. Wait for me, please. The weight of the words settled in. Miles exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a romance. Something went wrong. Eleanor nodded. She was running. From someone. They sat in silence, the couch no longer just furniture. It had become a vessel of secrets, a silent witness to desperation and hidden choices. I think we need to find out what happened to her, Elena said finally. Not just out of curiosity. Someone wrote these words in fear. Someone trusted this couch to keep their truth safe. Miles hesitated. We don't even know if the address still exists, or who lives there. Then we find out. We take it one step at a time. He looked at her, the same way he had years ago when she convinced him to move across the state with nothing but their truck and his grandmother's dresser, always chasing something just beneath the surface. All right, he said. One step. Eleanor picked up the sealed envelope again, the one marked to be opened only in love. She traced the edges, but didn't open it. Not yet. Maybe we'll understand this better once we know the full story, she said quietly. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both felt it. The couch wasn't done speaking. Not by a long shot. The following morning, with soft light pouring through the windows, Eleanor laid the letters across the table in chronological order. There were more than she'd realized, each dated, each written in the same steady hand, Thomas Greeley. Miles brewed coffee in silence, watching her work with the quiet intensity of an archivist on the verge of discovery. The earliest letter was dated February 14th, 1962. Dearest Margaret, I still remember your scarf fluttering in the wind that morning at the pier. You were wearing blue, and I thought then, I'd never seen anyone look so sure of themselves while breaking the rules. Your father doesn't understand what we are. But we will make our own life. We must. Forever, Thomas. The handwriting was firm, the ink slightly smudged. Elena read the words aloud, her voice soft. He sounds so certain, she said. Like love could conquer everything. Miles sat beside her, taking the next letter. March 4th, 1962. Margaret, the plans are set. I've spoken to the old caretaker. He'll let us use the cabin on the edge of the orchard. Just for a week. Long enough to breathe. I know it's not perfect, but it's a beginning. Bring only what you need, don't leave a trace. T. They continued reading in turns. Each letter added another thread to the tapestry. A secret romance kept alive through hidden messages and hopeful plans. Margaret's replies weren't there, but her presence was felt in the longing that shaped Thomas's every word. By June, the tone began to shift. The letters grew shorter, the handwriting less smooth. Worry seeped into the ink. June 17th, 1962. They've taken your mother to visit your aunt in Idaho. You said that would buy us time, but now I fear you were wrong. Your father asked questions today, about my job, my past. I heard him on the phone with someone. I think he's arranging something. Margaret, be careful, please. Thomas. Elena set the letter down, her hand trembling. She was in danger. And they were running out of time. Miles nodded slowly. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just disapproval, it was deeper. The final few letters were the most haunting. July 22nd, 1962. I waited at the orchard. Hours. The light was gone, the stars came, and still, I waited. Did something happen? Were you stopped? I don't know if you're safe or if you chose not to come. Either way, I'll wait again tomorrow and every night after. T. Then came the last letter. August 3rd, 1962. I'm leaving. I can't keep watching the road and praying you'll appear. Maybe you changed your mind. Maybe your father made sure you couldn't reach me. But I will carry you, Margaret, every breath, every mile. If you ever read this, know I never stopped loving you. Always. Thomas. Elena blinked quickly, trying to keep the emotion at bay. That's the last one. Miles stared at the final page, his jaw tight. He never knew what happened to her. And she never knew he waited. Her voice cracked. They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with the ache of what might have been. Then Eleanor reached for the locket again. She wore his photo close. Even if she never made it to the orchard, she kept him with her. Miles traced the edges of the final envelope again, the one still sealed. Maybe it says why. Why she didn't run. Why she hid it all. Maybe, Elena said, but I want to wait until we know more. I want her to have the last word when we're ready." As the day stretched on, they read and reread the letters, absorbing the world Thomas and Margaret had once clung to. And in doing so, they found themselves clinging too, not just to the mystery, but to the fragile, powerful truth of what two people once dared to hope for. On Sunday afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds and the letters rested carefully in labeled folders, Miles unfolded the last item from the hidden pouch, something that had slipped beneath the others, nearly missed. It was a newspaper clipping, creased and yellowed, torn along the edges but mostly intact. He placed it flat on the table, smoothing it gently. Eleanor leaned over his shoulder and read aloud the headline, "Local woman missing after family dispute, August 1964. Her voice caught. "That's 2 years after the last letter." Beneath the headline was a grainy black-and-white photo of a young woman. Her features were faint but unmistakable. Dark hair, clear eyes, the same quiet intensity as the woman in the locket. Margaret. The article was brief but chilling. Margaret Fields, 24, was last seen leaving her family's residence on North Glen Road late Thursday evening. Sources close to the family reported tensions between Margaret and her father regarding her social circle and alleged romantic entanglements. Authorities suspect she may have left voluntarily, but foul play has not been ruled out. Eleanor sat back, heart pounding. "This is her. She vanished." Miles read the article again slowly. "It says she was 24 in 1964. That means she was 22 when those letters were written." "She stayed," Elena said. "She didn't run away back then, but 2 years later." She tried again. There was no follow-up attached to the article, no resolution, no mention of her being found, dead or alive, just a headline, a picture, and a quiet implication that her disappearance was buried under whispers and shame. Elena folded her arms tightly. They made it sound like it was her fault, like she embarrassed the family. Miles didn't respond right away. He stared at the clipping, then back at the letters. "This isn't just a story anymore. It's a missing person case." Elena nodded slowly. "And no one ever followed up. No one cared enough to find out what really happened to her." She stood and paced the room. Her mind raced through the letters, the locket, the sealed envelope. Everything pointed to a life cut short, or a life forced into silence. "We need to find out more," she said. "Who was her family? Where did they live? Are any of them still alive?" Miles pulled out his laptop. "We've got names, and now we've got a date and a town. That's something." They typed Margaret Fields, missing, Oregon 1964, into the search bar. A few obscure references popped up. Old forums, genealogy pages, public archives. Most were dead ends. But then Elena clicked on a local history blog written by a retired journalist named Charles Ingram. The latest entry, posted just 3 months earlier, included a mention of the Fields family. The Fields were once considered one of the most influential families in the Glenn County region, the Post read. Their patriarch, Charles Fields Sr., was a stern and secretive man who rarely allowed his children into public life. His youngest daughter, Margaret, disappeared in 1964 under mysterious circumstances. Rumors of elopement, scandal, and family disgrace still linger. Elena's pulse quickened. So it wasn't just the newspaper. People still remember, even after all these years. Miles scrolled down. "There's a contact form. We could message this guy." "Do it," Eleanor said. "Ask him what he knows. Ask if he ever heard what happened to her." Miles began typing. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, a deeper storm was forming. The mystery was no longer a passive discovery. It had become a call to action. The letters had given Margaret a voice. The clipping had given her a name. Now it was time to find out what the world had done to silence both. Elena looked at the couch, its frame exposed, the cushions removed. It sat there stripped and waiting, like the truth itself. The email Miles sent was brief but direct. By the next morning, a reply sat waiting in his inbox. Subject, Margaret Fields, Inquiry, from Charles Ingram. Message, I remember the story. Not many do. If you're serious, I suggest you speak to Dolores Finch. She was a librarian at the Glenn County Library back then. Knows more than I ever did. Still alive, last I heard. Lives near the old schoolhouse. Tell her I sent you. Miles read the message aloud. Elena was already reaching for her coat. The drive to Glenn County took 2 hours through winding roads and fields browned by late summer. The town itself was small, quiet, aged, like it had surrendered its history to time. They parked near the old schoolhouse, now shuttered and fading. A cluster of houses sat nearby, one of them with a wind chime tinkling softly on the porch. They knocked. An elderly woman answered, her silver hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp beneath thin glasses. "Dolores Finch?" Elena asked. "I am," she replied, voice steady. "You're not here to sell me anything, are you?" "No, ma'am," Miles said. "Charles Ingram sent us. We're looking into Margaret Fields." Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes flickered. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." The living room smelled of rosewater and old books. Shelves lined every wall, and in the corner sat a worn armchair with a folded quilt. Dolores moved slowly but with purpose, settling into the chair as if preparing for something long overdue. "I always knew someone would come asking," she said. "But I thought it'd be a journalist, not a couple of kids." Elena smiled faintly. "We found something. Letters. In a couch." Dolores raised her eyebrows. "The yellow one with the walnut legs?" Eleanor froze. "You know it?" "I catalogued the Fields estate after Charles Sr. died. That couch was in Margaret's room. Her mother had it moved to storage. I helped pack the house." Miles leaned forward. "Did you know Margaret?" "I saw her often," Dolores said. "She'd come to the library on Saturdays. Quiet, polite. Always borrowed poetry or books about far-off places. Her father didn't like it. He believed women belonged in kitchens, not in ideas." She sighed, eyes distant. Margaret had dreams, but they weren't the kind her family approved of. Eleanor hesitated. "Do you know what happened to her?" Dolores didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for a small box on the side table and opened it. Inside were old index cards, photographs, and folded newspaper articles. She pulled out a file labeled Fields M and handed it over. "I kept this," she said, "because no one else would." Eleanor opened it gently. Inside was a copy of the same missing persons article, along with library cards, handwritten notes, and a single photograph of Margaret in front of the library steps. She looked so young, hopeful. "There were rumors," Dolores continued. "Some said she ran off with a man, others whispered that she'd gotten pregnant. Her father swore she brought disgrace on their name. When she disappeared, he refused to file a report at first, said she was no longer his daughter." Elena clenched her jaw, but he filed one eventually. Only when pressured. The police barely searched. It was easier to let the story die. Miles spoke quietly. "Did you believe she ran away?" Dolores nodded. "Yes, but I never believed she ran far. Not without help. Not without somewhere safe to go." They sat in silence for a long moment. The file, the couch, the letters, it all formed the edges of something still incomplete. "Thank you," Elena said. "How you kept her alive in a way." Dolores reached for a cup of tea. "If you want the truth, follow the things she touched, the books, the furniture. She left traces. People like her always do." As they left, Elena held the file to her chest. They were no longer just uncovering history. They were rescuing a voice that time had tried to bury. Back home, the air inside the apartment felt different. The file from Dolores Finch rested on the kitchen counter like an unsolved equation, and the couch, now fully stripped down to its skeleton, waited silently in the center of the living room. Elena was poring over the photograph of Margaret again, but Miles had something else in mind. He rolled up his sleeves and turned the frame on its side. Something had been nagging at him since he first opened the armrest. There was a hollow sound beneath the right cushion that didn't match the rest. He tapped it again. Yes, it was there. A false panel. Using a flathead screwdriver, he pried gently at the edge of the wood until it gave. A soft creak, and then the panel slid loose, revealing a small compartment no larger than a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in a crumbling cotton handkerchief, was a velvet ring box. His hands froze. "Eleanor," he called. She looked up, eyes wide as she approached. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a single sapphire, deep blue and glimmering even in the dim light. Tucked beneath it was a folded note. The ink slightly bled from age. "My love, when the time is right, ask me. I will say yes." Monsieur Elena exhaled slowly. "It's an engagement ring." "She said yes," Miles whispered. "Or she would have." Elena picked up the ring carefully, holding it to the light. He must have given it to her. Maybe it was hidden to protect it. Beneath the box was a small cloth-bound book, a photo album. Its pages stuck slightly as Miles opened it. There were no captions, only tiny black-and-white snapshots. Margaret and Thomas smiling in a field, her hair tied with a scarf, a candid of them laughing on a porch, a blurred picture of a handwritten sign that read, "Meet me where we first kissed." Each image felt like a heartbeat suspended in time. Elena ran a hand over the photo of the porch. This isn't the Fields' house. It's somewhere else. Maybe the orchard, Miles guessed, or that caretaker's cabin he mentioned. The final page of the album held one last photograph, Margaret standing alone, holding a letter to her chest, staring straight into the camera. Her expression was unreadable, determined, maybe defiant. On the back of the photo, scribbled in pencil, July 1964, 1 month left. Miles looked at Eleanor. This was just before she disappeared. She knew something was coming, she murmured, or planned something. He placed the items carefully beside the letters, the ring, the photo album, a fragile trail of a life once hidden, but it wasn't over. While lifting the baseboard of the couch, Miles noticed another irregularity. A strip of burlap looked slightly looser. He tugged at it gently and felt something hard behind it. Another envelope. This one was thick, sealed and unlabeled. He handed it to Eleanor. She didn't open it. Instead, she held it like a secret, not yet ready to be revealed. "We wait," she said. "We'll know when it's time." Miles nodded, though part of him burned with curiosity. They sat beside each other, surrounded by fragments of a love story written in ink, cloth and wood. The couch had stopped being just furniture. It had become a confidant, a guardian of truths too long hidden. As dusk settled outside, Miles glanced at Elena. "What do we do next?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced the edge of the ring box, her thoughts elsewhere. "We find where that last photo was taken," she finally said, "and then we follow the rest of the story. Because now, it wasn't just Margaret's past they were chasing, it was her voice, and she was finally starting to speak again. The search for the porch in the photo led them to an unexpected name, Daniel Fields, a nephew of Charles Fields Sr., and the last known living relative of the family. Eleanor found him listed under a small real estate business in Pendleton, Oregon. After 3 ignored emails, Miles decided to call. Daniel answered on the 4th ring. His voice was wary, but not unkind. "I don't usually talk about family history," he said, "but if this is about Margaret, come by, I've got an hour." They drove northeast, nerves tense and quiet, heavy between them. Pendleton was all old storefronts and dry wind. Daniel's office was tucked behind a laundromat, cluttered with boxes and maps of rural properties. He looked to be in his late 60s, with thinning hair and the cautious eyes of someone who'd buried more than memories. "You're not the first to ask about her," he said, motioning them in. "But you're the first who seems to care." Eleanor opened her bag and laid the letters gently on his desk. The locket, the photograph, the ring. Daniel's breath caught. He reached for the picture of Margaret holding the letter. "I was 12 when she vanished," he said. "She was always kind to me, never talked down. I remember her reading poetry by the window. My father, her brother, used to say she was too wild for her own good, that she needed control." He paused, voice growing tighter. "When she disappeared, they told me she'd run off, that she was selfish, that she ruined the family name. But I never believed it was that simple." Miles leaned forward. "Did you ever hear about Thomas Greeley?" Daniel's eyes sharpened. "That name, yes. He was the boy they blamed, said he seduced her, but I think they were in love. My grandfather hated him, said he was a laborer with no future, that Margaret needed a proper match." Elena unwrapped the engagement ring. Daniel held it like it was glass. "She kept this," he said, "all that time." He looked at Elena, something shifting in his voice. "Do you think she left?" "For real?" "I think she tried," Elena answered. "More than once." Daniel nodded slowly. "There was a cabin near the orchard. My grandfather sold the land in the 70s, but the caretaker's house might still be there. Margaret loved it, said it was the only place she could breathe." He stood and went to a filing cabinet, rummaging until he pulled out a folder. Inside was a photo, one of the orchard, and another of a wooden cabin shaded by trees. "That's it," he said. "I haven't seen this in years." Eleanor studied the photo. It matched the one in the album, just older, faded. "This is where they met," she said. Daniel offered the photo. "Take it. I've held on to ghosts long enough." They left the office with more than just information. They left with a human thread, someone who remembered Margaret not as a scandal but as a soul. Back in the car, Eleanor stared at the picture in her lap. She had people who loved her. she said softly. They just weren't allowed to say it out loud. Miles nodded, eyes on the road. Let's find that cabin. The wind picked up as they drove, scattering dust across the highway. Behind them, the shadows of a family's silence faded just a little more, because truth doesn't disappear. It waits, in boxes, in photographs, in the corners of forgotten rooms, until someone finally dares to listen. The road to the orchard was nearly invisible now, choked by weeds and time. Daniel's directions led them down a gravel path, flanked by gnarled trees, ghosts of what once might have been rows of flourishing apple and pear. At the far end stood the cabin, worn but intact, its wood darkened by decades of weather and silence. Miles pushed the door open with a gentle shove. Dust swirled in the filtered sunlight. The air smelled of rot and pine. Eleanor stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning every surface for signs of life once lived. The furniture had been cleared out long ago, but a rusted metal bed frame remained in one corner, along with a collapsed bookshelf and a broken lamp. Nothing immediately connected to Margaret, but the place felt heavy with untold things. Miles found the motel registry by accident. It was tucked inside a drawer of a rickety desk, water-damaged and half-consumed by mold. But the pages, handwritten guest entries from decades past, were still mostly legible. He flipped through slowly, fingers trembling with cautious hope. "Here," he said suddenly. "Look." Eleanor peered over his shoulder. August 7th, 1964. Marjorie F. One night, paid cash. "That's 2 days after the newspaper said she disappeared," Elena whispered. "She checked in here." "It's her," Miles said. "She changed her name slightly, probably to stay hidden." They scanned the rest of the page. No notes, no forwarding address, just a single line written in simple script. The name, Marjorie, felt deliberate, not random, but chosen. So Elena ran a finger down the following entries. No other mention of her. No sign she stayed longer than that one night. "She was here," she said softly. "Then she vanished again." They sat in silence on the wooden floor, the ledger resting between them. Elena stared at the faint pencil marks, imagining Marjorie checking in under that name. Alone, afraid, hopeful. "She was running," Elena said. "But from what?" Miles didn't answer. Instead, he turned the pages backward, searching earlier dates. A week before, another entry appeared. TG, 3 nights, paid cash. Eleanor's heart skipped. "Thomas Greeley. He waited here," Miles said. "Or maybe they planned to meet." It was too much to ignore. They were following a path laid 50 years ago, each stop another whispered clue, and now they were almost at the end of it. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only in love." She stared at it for a long moment, then slid it back inside. "Not yet," she said. "We're close." But not there. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Back in the car, they reviewed the names again. Marjorie FTG, separate but converging. The ledger was more than a record. It was confirmation. They had both been here. Margaret had taken a new name. Thomas was nearby, but the trail still ended in fog. As they drove toward town, a hand-painted sign caught Elena's eye. Mill Creek Public Records, Historical Archive open Saturdays. She grabbed Miles's arm. "Pull over, because sometimes the answers don't hide in the shadows. They sit quietly in ledgers, in forgotten files, waiting for someone to care enough to find them. And now, finally, someone did." The Mill Creek Archive was small, run by volunteers, and smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil. Eleanor and Miles arrived just as the doors opened, greeted by an older man named Frank, who listened to their request with mild skepticism until they mentioned the Fields family. He led them to a back room stacked with filing cabinets and binders. "If she checked in under a different name, try marriage records and death certificates. We've got copies through 99. Hours passed as they combed through faded documents, the hum of a nearby fan the only sound. Eleanor's eyes blurred from the repetition of names, dates, towns. Then she paused. She held up a thin certificate. Name of deceased, Marjorie Fields. Date of death, March 22nd, 2001. Place of death, Livingston, Montana. Her hand trembled. "Marjorie Fields," she whispered. She didn't change her last name completely, just her first. Miles leaned over, scanning the page. She kept the F, maybe to stay tethered. Maybe she wanted to disappear but not be forgotten. The certificate listed her age as 61. The math checked out. Born in 1940. died in 2001, buried in a small public cemetery outside Livingston. No spouse listed. One daughter, Ruth Ellman. Elena grabbed a notepad. That's our next step. They called the Livingston County Clerk's office, explained their situation, and were referred to the town's records librarian. After 2 calls and a brief silence on the other end of the line, the woman said softly, "There's a Ruth Ellman listed here, born in '65, still living locally." Eleanor and Miles drove through the night. They crossed into Montana under a velvet sky, headlights cutting through darkness like blades. Neither spoke much. Their minds churned with questions, but one thought pulsed above the rest. Had Marjorie survived long enough to tell her story? Livingston was quiet, a town of brick storefronts, old signage, and the smell of pine on wind. The address for Ruth Ellman led them to a modest white house with a tidy yard and a red mailbox. Eleanor stood on the porch for a long time before knocking. The woman who opened the door looked to be in her late 50s. She had strong cheekbones, soft eyes, and a cautious demeanor. "Yes," she said, gentle but guarded. "Are you Ruth Ellman?" Eleanor asked. "I am. My name is Elena Harper. This is Miles Bennett. We're looking into the life of someone we believe was your mother, Marjorie Fields." Ruth didn't answer at first. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together. "She died when I was 36, Ruth said. "I didn't know much about her past. She didn't talk about it." Miles spoke gently. "We found letters, hidden in a couch, a love story, a missing person, and a ring." Ruth's expression changed, not with surprise but recognition. "She used to hum the same melody every night," Ruth said quietly. "Never knew what it was. Just soft humming, like a lullaby. Sometimes she'd cry." Eleanor opened her bag and handed her the locket. Ruth took it, fingers trembling. "She had this," Eleanor said, "hidden in the couch, along with this." She showed her the engagement ring, the photo album, the letter signed M. Ruth stared at each item, one by one, then turned toward the living room. "She was gentle," she said, "but always looking over her shoulder. We moved a lot when I was young. She never explained why, just said it was safer that way." Eleanor asked, "Do you want to know more about her past?" Ruth nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I think I've wanted that my whole life." And for the first time the story shifted. It wasn't just about discovery. It became about return, about a daughter reclaiming a mother whose truth had been buried too long. The next morning, after a quiet night in Livingston, Elena woke with one thought echoing through her chest. It's time. The sealed envelope had remained unopened for days, carried from room to room, state to state. It had waited through discovery, through doubt, through long drives and dead ends. But now, in the company of the woman who had unknowingly lived its echo, it was ready. Ruth sat across the table, the locket still clutched in her hand. Her eyes were calm, but her fingers trembled. "You can open it," she said. Eleanor nodded. With careful fingers, she broke the wax seal. The paper inside was thick, its edges yellowed but intact. The handwriting was unmistakably Margaret's, elegant, precise. She read aloud. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, then the things I've hidden were found, not by accident but by someone searching. Thank you. Thank you for caring enough to look. My name was Margaret Fields, but in the life I chose, I became Marjorie. I had to leave everything behind to protect what mattered most, my child. I was young once, in love with a man the world told me I could never have. Thomas. He gave me hope when everything around me was control, silence, and shame. We made plans. We wrote letters. But I hesitated. I stayed too long under my father's roof, and by the time I was ready, it was almost too late. I was pregnant. I didn't tell Thomas. I was afraid. Not of him, but of what my father would do if he found out. When I disappeared, the papers said I ran. In truth, I fled. With help from an old friend, I stayed one night in a motel before disappearing again. I changed my name. I gave birth alone. I raised Ruth in fragments of safety. I never stopped loving him, not for a single day. I kept the locket close. I kept the ring hidden. I kept the photo album as proof I had once been loved freely. I hid them all in the only place that had ever felt like mine, my old couch. I hoped one day someone would find them. Maybe Ruth. Maybe a stranger with a kind heart. I don't know if Thomas ever searched for me. I don't know if he knew about Ruth, but I know what he gave me. Courage. A reason to believe I could be more than someone else's secret. Please tell my daughter this. I loved her with everything I had. I gave her a quiet life because I believed that was safer, but she deserves to know the whole truth. She was born of love. Not shame, never shame. And if Thomas is still alive, tell him I waited too. Always. Monsieur Elena's voice cracked on the last word. Silence followed, thick, unmovable. Ruth pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closed, tears streaming without sound. For years she had wondered about the fragments, the quiet sadness in her mother's smile, the humming, the guarded moves. And now it was all there, handwritten and unshakable. The truth, folded neatly inside the silence of a sealed envelope. Miles wiped his eyes and leaned back in his chair. She was brave. She was everything, Ruth whispered. Elena placed the letter back on the table. You deserve to know where you came from, and she deserves to be remembered for the woman she really was. Ruth nodded. She will be. Starting now. And with that, the last hidden piece of Margaret Fields' story slipped into the light. Not lost, not forgotten, but finally heard. Ruth invited them to stay the afternoon. She brewed tea, while Elena carefully refolded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. The room felt changed, warmer, lighter. The silence that had filled it before now carried something else. Recognition. I always knew there was more, Ruth said, placing cups on the table. When I was little, I asked her why we moved so much. She'd say we were chasing sunshine. I thought that was poetry. Turns out it was protection. Miles nodded. She gave up everything for you. I see that now. Ruth sat down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. And I see her in me, the way I worry. The way I write things down instead of saying them. Even the way I hum when I'm nervous, it all came from her. Elena smiled gently. She was strong. She was scared, Ruth corrected. But she didn't let that stop her. That's strength. They brought out the photo album. Ruth leaned in, examining each image as if trying to locate herself in the expressions, the tilt of Margaret's head, the curve of her smile. She loved him, Ruth said. That man, Thomas, you can see it. Look at her eyes. Eleanor nodded. And he loved her. I wonder what happened to him. Ruth's voice was soft. If he ever found peace. Miles said nothing, but the question lingered. Ruth turned the page. There was one photo she hadn't seen yet, the one Eleanor had kept in a separate envelope. Margaret holding the letter, staring straight into the lens. Ruth stared at it for a long time. She looks like she's saying goodbye. She was, Eleanor said, but not to you. She carried you into her new life. This was her letting go of everything that wouldn't come with her. They fell quiet again. Then Ruth stood, walked to a nearby cabinet, and returned with a wooden box. Inside were papers, small keepsakes, and a stack of old journals. These are hers, she said. I found them when she died. I never read them. I was afraid. She handed one to Elena. The first page held a date, September 1965. The first entry began, she took her first steps today. Elena looked up. You? Ruth smiled. Me? They read together. The entries were simple, sometimes sparse, but always tender. Descriptions of Ruth's childhood, notes about favorite foods, fears of storms, stories about school and scraped knees. She wrote like she was trying to bottle every moment, Ruth whispered. She probably was, Elena said. When you lose so much, you hold tighter to what's left. By sunset, they had read through 3 journals. Ruth looked changed, like something inside her had finally settled. Not in sorrow, but in certainty. I used to feel like I didn't have a past, she said. Now I feel like I have roots, even if they grew underground. Miles stood, stretching. What are you going to do with all this? Ruth thought for a moment. I want to write it down, all of it, not just for me, for her, so she's remembered fully. Not as someone who disappeared, but someone who survived. She looked at Elena. Would you help me? Elena didn't hesitate. Of course. Because that's what stories are meant to do. Not just preserve the past, but carry it forward, breathing life into names once nearly lost. That night, before leaving, Eleanor glanced back at Ruth, standing in the doorway. She saw not just a daughter reclaiming a mother, but a legacy being restored, thread by thread, with truth, courage, and love. Back in Corvallis, weeks after they'd returned from Montana, the couch sat fully restored in the center of Elena and Miles's living room. Its mustard yellow fabric had been carefully replaced with a soft, deep blue velvet, chosen by Elena not for style but for symbolism. Blue like the ink in Margaret's letters, like the sapphire in the ring, like the quiet strength of a life rebuilt in shadows. Elena sat with a cup of tea staring at the couch. Miles entered from the kitchen. "You've been quiet lately." "I've been thinking," she said, "about everything. Margaret, Ruth, all the ways stories get buried." He nodded and sat beside her. "It changes you, doesn't it?" "It does," she said, "and I don't want to let it fade. I want to do something with it." Miles looked at her, curious. "Like what?" Elena reached for a notebook on the table. Inside were outlines, scraps of sentences, quotes from the letters, notes from their trip, the beginnings of something bigger. "I'm writing her story," she said. "From the letters, the journals, from Ruth's memories. I want people to know who she really was." Miles smiled. "That's perfect." "It's more than a project," Eleanor added. "It's a promise. To Margaret, to Ruth, to every voice that never got to speak loud enough." She paused, then looked him in the eye. "And to myself." "What do you mean?" Eleanor took a breath. "I've spent years teaching other people's stories, history in textbooks, names of men carved in stone. But this was a woman's life, stitched into a couch and left behind. And it's just as important." Miles reached over, squeezed her hand. "More important, because you brought it back." She smiled. "We brought it back." The next day, Eleanor cleared space on the bookshelf and made room for a new binder, Margaret Field's Archive. Inside were copies of every letter, photographs, the scanned motel ledger, and the transcript of the final note. But it wasn't just about preservation anymore. Eleanor started writing at night. She poured herself into the keyboard, sentence after sentence, reliving every step. How they found the first bundle, Dolores's quiet wisdom, Daniel's memories, the moment Ruth held the locket. It flowed like it had been waiting for her. She titled the manuscript Hidden Threads. By the end of the second week, she had 40,000 words. Miles read every page. "You've got something real here," he said one night. "Something powerful." Elena hesitated. "Do you think people will care? That they'll believe it matters?" "Of course," he said, "because it does. And because you believe it." One morning, while waiting for coffee to brew, Elena received an email from a small independent publisher she had sent a sample chapter to, on a whim, nothing more. The subject line read, "We're moved. Let's talk." Her hands shook as she opened it. They wanted the story. All of it. She sat in stunned silence, rereading the message again and again. Then she called Ruth. When she told her the news, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "She would have been proud," she said. "I know it." Elena smiled through the lump in her throat. "It's our story now. Yours, hers, mine." Later that day, she sat on the couch, the ring box resting beside her, the album open to that final photo of Margaret staring into the lens, not saying goodbye, but daring someone to find her. And someone did. Elena whispered, "We found you." Because sometimes history isn't made by kings or battles, but by women who refuse to be forgotten, and by those who listen hard enough to hear them. Elena's blog post went live on a quiet Tuesday morning. She titled it, "The Couch That Remembered Her Name." It wasn't a chapter from the manuscript, but a personal reflection, a snapshot of the journey. She included photographs of the letters, the ring, a blurred scan of the motel ledger, and she wrote Margaret's name in full, Margaret Fields. The post began slowly, a few comments from friends, a handful of shares. But by the end of the week, something shifted. A local newspaper picked it up, then a regional site. A national podcast host reached out, asking for an interview. Within 10 days, the post had over 100,000 views. People weren't just reading, they were responding. Messages flooded Elena's inbox. Some offered condolences. Others shared similar stories about hidden letters, forgotten family members, decades-old secrets resurfacing in attic boxes or behind wallpaper. One woman from Ohio wrote, "I never told anyone about the ring I found in my grandmother's Bible. After your story, I want to know who it belonged to." Ruth called late that night. Her voice was full of awe. "She's being seen," she said. "For the first time, the world is seeing her." Eleanor agreed. And not just Margaret. Thomas, too. Dolores. Daniel. Everyone who'd carried pieces of the story in silence. A week later, the local library in Corvallis asked to host a small reading event. Elena hesitated, but Ruth encouraged her. "You're not telling someone else's story," she said. "You're telling all of ours." The night of the event, the room was full. Teachers, students, neighbors, people Elena didn't recognize. Miles stood near the back, his arms crossed proudly. Ruth sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Eleanor as she read the final letter aloud. There were tears in the room, not from spectacle, but connection. Everyone understood the ache of a voice nearly lost. Afterward, a woman approached with a soft smile. My mother had a name she never used. I used to think it was just a nickname. Now I wonder. Eleanor handed her a card. Start with what you have. Follow the threads. That same week, Elena received a second email from the publisher. A release date had been chosen. Early next year. Advance copies would be printed by fall. They were calling it a true American secret. Elena wasn't sure about the title, but she understood the sentiment. Margaret's story had unfolded like folklore, but it was real, raw, and unflinching. Not just about love or escape, but about the quiet war women fought to be free. With permission from Ruth, she created a companion website to the book. There, she uploaded transcripts of the letters, annotated timelines, and scanned documents. She added a forum, too, hidden threads where others could share their discoveries. It didn't take long for the community to grow. One night, while reading through submissions, Elena found herself in tears again. Not because of Margaret, but because of what her story had awakened in others. Daughters searching for mothers, sons asking questions no one had dared to answer, people reclaiming truth. Miles entered the room, drying his hands from dishes. Another late night. Elena smiled. It doesn't feel like work. Not really. You think she'd be proud? She paused, then nodded. I think she already knows. Because some stories live in silence for years, waiting for the right voice to carry them forward. And now, thanks to a broken couch, a faded letter, and a woman who refused to forget, the silence was gone. Months later, Eleanor sat on the couch, Margaret's couch, now vibrant in its new fabric, the seams no longer hiding secrets, but honoring them. She held a finished copy of the book in her lap. Hidden Threads had arrived from the publisher that morning, warm from the box, its cover matte and heavy with purpose. On the first page, in simple font, for Margaret, who chose freedom, for Ruth, who found truth, and for every voice still waiting to be heard. She traced the dedication with her finger. The journey had ended, but its weight lingered, in the letters, in the voices, in the countless messages still arriving daily. Readers from all over the country shared their own fragments. Some sent photos, others wrote essays. One woman mailed Elena a yellowed envelope she'd found in her attic saying, I don't know what this means, but maybe you will. Ruth had read the book twice. The second time, she said, she wasn't reading about her mother anymore. She was reading about herself. She gave me life, she told Elena, but you gave me memory. That's a different kind of birth. Elena kept that note pinned above her desk. Miles entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her and sat down. You did it, he said. We did, she replied. All of us. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. It was late autumn now, the kind of day where silence feels earned. She flipped to the last page of the book. The final line still gave her chills every time she read it. Truth never rots. It waits, quietly, beneath the stitches. That was what Margaret had taught her. That courage doesn't always come in noise. Sometimes it lives in small choices, letters hidden in seams, names written in ledgers, lullabies hummed in kitchens, and sometimes all it takes to unearth them is someone willing to listen long enough. Elena looked up, her eyes settling on the photograph above the fireplace, a scanned image of Margaret in the orchard, holding the letter, staring at a future she never got to claim. Now in this house, her gaze met theirs daily. No longer forgotten, no longer silent. She stood and reached for her laptop. Time to post the last chapter, she said. The last? Miles asked. The last of Margaret's, she replied, but not the last of mine. He smiled. So what's next? She thought for a moment, then said, there's always another voice, another thread. I just have to follow it. Because that's what stories are. They don't end. They ripple, they echo. And for those listening right now, for those who stayed with us until the very last page, we have one small favor to ask. If this journey moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that even forgotten voices deserve to be heard, please subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep uncovering what time tried to bury, and how you stay connected to the stories waiting to be told. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now to watch another true, unbelievable discovery. This time, hidden inside an abandoned suitcase at a train station. Because the past isn't gone, it's right beneath us, waiting,